Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutala Srimad Bhagavatam. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Prachari Devi Sasya Vadi Pasatanta Satarni. Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I wasn't expecting to be speaking. My name is Kishore Dasa, for those of you who don't know. We're reading from the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Yeah. Closer. Thank you. And we're going to begin on chapter 17. And the chapter is entitled Mother Parvati Curses Chitraketu. I'm going to read the synopsis of the chapter and possibly begin with a verse. I feel like saying, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I'll go ahead and do my best and speak some words. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Now, I just have a bottle here of water. Do we normally have a tumbler that I can drink from? I think I'd possibly prefer that rather than slugging out of a bottle. So can I read the intro to the chapter? Yeah, okay. Chapter 17, entitled Mother Parvati Curses Chitraketu. The 17th chapter is summarized as follows. Engaging in congregational chanting of the glories of the Lord, he began flying his plane and traveling in outer space. One day, while traveling like this, he wandered into the bowers of Sumeru mountain, where he came upon Lord Shiva embracing Parvati, surrounded by an assembly of Sitas, Charanas, and great sages. Seeing Lord Shiva in that situation, Chitraketu laughed very loudly, but Parvati became very angry at him and cursed him. Because of this curse, Chitraketu later appeared as the demon Vritasura. Chitraketu, however, was not at all afraid of Parvati's curse. And thus he spoke as follows. Everyone in human society enjoys happiness and distress according to his past deeds, and in this way travels in the material world. Therefore, no one is responsible for his happiness and distress. One is controlled by the influence of material nature in the material world. Yet one thinks himself the doer of everything. In this material world, which is made of the external energy of the Supreme Lord, one is sometimes cursed and sometimes favored. And thus he sometimes enjoys in the upper planetary systems, and sometimes suffers in the lower planets. But all these situations are the same, because they are within this material world. None of these positions has any factual existence, for all of them are temporary. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate controller, because the material world is created, maintained, and annihilated under his control, while he nonetheless remains neutral to these different transformations of the material world in time and space. The material external energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in charge of this material world. The Lord helps the world by creating situations for the living entities within it. When Chitraketu spoke in this way, all the members in the great assembly in which Lord Shiva and Parvati were present were astonished. Then Lord Shiva began speaking about the devotees of the Lord. A devotee is neutral in all conditions of life, whether in the heavenly planets or hellish planets, whether liberated from the material world or conditioned by it, and whether blessed with happiness or subjected to distress. These are all merely dualities created by the external energy. Being influenced by the external energy, the living entity accepts a gross and subtle material body. And in this illusory position, he apparently suffers miseries. Although everyone is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The so-called demigods consider themselves independent lords. And in this way, they are misled from understanding that all living entities are part of the Supreme. This chapter concludes by glorifying the devotee and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Is Loka written anywhere? Or what's the, okay. Do we read the Sanskrit? Yeah. Okay, I see. Will I begin reading the Sanskrit for the first text? I can read it anyway. So, Sri Sukade Uvacha Yatras Chantar Hito Nantas Tasyai Kriva Dishe Nama Vidya Dadas Chitra Ketus Chachara Gaganechara. Translation. Srila Sukadeva Goswami said, after offering obeisances to the direction from which Ananta, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, had disappeared, Chitraketu began traveling in outer space as the head of the Vidyadharas. Hare Krishna. So what do we have up here? Second and third. Okay. So this is the second and third verse. Sa laksham varsha lakshanam avyahata balendriya stutaya mano mahayogi munibi siddha charanai Kula Chalendra Dronishu Nana Sankalpa Siddhishu Reme Vidya Darastribir Gapayan Harim Ishvaram Sa He Chitraketu Laksham 100,000 Varsha of years Lakshanam 100,000 Avyahata without hindrance Bala Indriya whose strength and power of the senses Stuya Manaha being praised Mahayogi, the great mystic yogi, Munibi, by saintly persons, Siddhacharanai, by the siddhas and charanas, Kula Chalendra Dronishu, within the valleys of the great mountains known as Kula Chalendra or Sumeru, Nana Sankalpa Siddhishu, where one becomes perfect in all kinds of mystic power. Reme enjoyed Vidyadhara Stribi with the women of the Vidyadhara planet. Gapayan, causing to praise Harim, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. Ishwaram, the controller. And the translation is as follows. Being praised by great sages and saints, and by the inhabitants of Siddhaloka and Karanaloka, Chitraketu, the most powerful mystic yogi, wandered about enjoying life for millions of years. With bodily strength and senses free from deterioration, he traveled within the valleys of Sumeru Mountain, which is a place of perfection for various kinds of mystic power. In those valleys, he enjoyed life with the women of Vidyadhara Loka by chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord Hari. It is to be understood that Maharaj Chitraketu, although surrounded by beautiful women from Vidyadhara Loka, did not forget to glorify the Lord by chanting the holy name of the Lord. It has been proved in many places that one who is not contaminated by any material condition, who is a pure devotee, engaged in chanting the glories of the Lord, should be understood to be perfect. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. I don't really know what I'm going to say because I'm so unused to speaking and giving class before an assembly of Vaishnavas. So I feel blessed that I've been invited to say something, but maybe unqualified to speak on such elevated subject matter as we have here. I think possibly Maharaj there might be more qualified to speak a few words. So I might just put it out to you, Maharaj, if you'd like to give your views on what I've just been speaking about here. Okay, it's well. It's easier for me to read Prabhupada's purports and Prabhupada's descriptions and to chant the Sanskrit verses, and but to speak on such an elevated subject as this, I still feel that such a neophyte, newcomer. I'm probably more inclined recall some of my recollections of Srila Prabhupada's visit to Scotland, in which Prabhupada came to the West in 1965, and in 1972, 6 or 7 years later, he came up to Scotland for a couple of days to continue spreading his mission of Krishna consciousness, which we're all participating in now. One time, shortly after he came to Scotland, I was in his room at Bhaktivedanta Manor, in which he was addressing a room full of people from different religions. There were priests and nuns and representatives of all kinds of religions. There were Buddhist monks, and all kinds of people were in there. And he gave a talk about Krishna consciousness and how there was no distinction between Krishna consciousness and other religions. And after he'd finished speaking, one of the priests raised his hand and said, "Swami, what is the best religion?" And I was still very young, and so I was taking it all in very enthusiastically and keenly. And Prabhupada immediately replied, "It doesn't matter what religion you follow. What matters is, are you following?" And what I learned from that, he said, as long as you're following a bona fide religion, whether it's Islam or Christian or Buddhist, if you follow the teachings of your master, you will arrive at love of God, which is the purpose of all religion. So those were the basic things I remember hearing from Srila Prabhupada. When I come here to Les Mohego and I feel and I see the devotees chanting the japa in the morning and following the principles of Krishna consciousness, I remember these things that Prabhupada said, that for us to succeed in our journey of spiritual life, of Krishna consciousness, or whatever it is that we're looking for in our religion, if we follow the teachings of that particular order, we'll develop in our hearts that love for God, that love for Krishna. When Prabhupada came to Scotland, also he went for one walk. He had a very wry sense of humor. And he came back from walking around in Edinburgh, and he made a remark. It was just a very off-the-cuff remark. He noticed that, I don't know if he was referring to Scottish people in general or to the people of Edinburgh. He made a comment about they're very proud of their buildings, because the devotees who were with them were very impressed with the beautiful buildings. Going down, there was obviously Edinburgh Castle, and the mound onto Princess Street and so forth, back towards the manor, not the manor, to the temple. So there are some things I can remember. But I think I'm drying up with inspiration as to what to speak, because I'm so unused to speaking like this. An incident where? Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you remember that?
Yeah, I'll never forget that. Yeah, I like to recall that. Yes, so there was one particular, Prabhupada had been invited, we'd organized a program for Prabhupada to speak in Mary Hill in Glasgow, the Woodside Halls. And as you may know, Mary Hill is one of the roughest part of Glasgow. We decided to book this particular hall, though, because it was near the university. And also because it was an Indian Hindu area as well. Lots of Indians were in that particular area as well. So we thought it would be well attended by students and at least lots of Hindus. And we thought that that would make them. And it was a very successful program. A lot of people were there. 300 or 400 people came to the program. Prabhupada was very happy. So it was full. The hall was full, and Prabhupada had finished speaking. I can remember, I'm hoping that Prabhupada would give well, let's put it this way. Prabhupada's talk was a very forceful one. He was talking from Bhagavad Gita. He was talking about the battle. He was talking about Arjuna's dilemma. And he was talking about our mission was to overcome our doubts and our dilemmas and our reluctance to surrender to Krishna. So Prabhupada was emphasizing how Arjuna's dilemma took place on the middle of this battlefield, and he spoke about war and fighting and the battle of Kurukshetra, but primarily, of course, he was talking about how Arjuna was able to overcome his reluctance to fight against his loved ones and his family members and so forth. He was traumatized by what he had to do as his service. That was his service. He was a kshatriya, a warrior, and he was being called to fight the way he was. But I was born in Glasgow. I left Glasgow at a very early age because I always was involved with violence and fighting, and I left at a very early age because one of my own friends was killed on the streets of Glasgow. So I didn't like it at all. So when Prabhupada came, I'm hoping that he'd give a sweetness and light kind of talk, sweetness and light. But it was anything but. I've listened to it over and over again, though. I have the tape of the talk that Prabhupada gave. And it's not necessarily as heavy as I thought at the time. It was a brilliant talk. But afterwards, when it came to questions and answers, Prabhupada said, "Are there any questions?" And there were one or two polite questions from the audience. And then this chap at the back of the hall, he stood up and he started to go rant. He started ranting away. He was very angry or very drunk or very stoned or whatever it was. And he was a student. He had long hair, a beard and so forth. He was a bit raggedy. And he was ranting away at the back of the hall. So Prabhupada, he turned to his servant and he said, "I cannot hear what he's saying. Can you ask him to come?" So it was Rabbanandan Swami, one of his sannyasis. He asked the chap to come down the back of the hall because we can't hear what you're saying. So he came all the way down the middle aisle and he never stopped going on. And the gist of what he was saying was, why are you asking us all to surrender to God when we're all God? Already we're God. Why are you asking us to surrender to God? We're all God. That was what I could hear. That was the gist of his argument. he was very agitated and angry as well. So he came all the way down, and he kept going on about whatever it was he was. And Prabhupada just sat on his Vyasasan serenely as he is just now and listened. He just heard him out until he was finished going on. And then Prabhupada said, "So, you're finished now?" And he looked up at Prabhupada and said, "Yes." And Prabhupada just looked at him and quietly said, "You're not God, you're dog." And then he proceeded to explain to the chap how he couldn't be God. Prabhupada then said, God means controller. You're in control, he said to the chap. And the chap wasn't expecting any feedback, I think, from Prabhupada or any response from Prabhupada. So he looked back up at Prabhupada and said, yes, sometimes. Sometimes. Prabhupada said, yes, sometimes. In the office, you are controller. At home, you are controlled, he said. Or maybe it was the other round, I forget. But Prabhupada turned it around with just a few words, to explain that, yes, but Krishna, he's always in control. He's never controlled by anyone. Of course, he didn't explain about the gopis, of course, and Radha. We know that Krishna is controlled by the love of his devotees, by his pure devotees, but that's another issue that Prabhupada wasn't. That he just made the and repeatedly on the occasions that I heard Prabhupada speak or explain Krishna consciousness to anyone, it was always very practical and very scientific. If you understand what I mean, it was very acceptable. His business was to somehow or other remove the darkness, the confusion, the bewilderment that we live with, the conditioned state that we all live in. That was his business, was to somehow or other take it out of the equation so that we could understand, I'm not this body. I'm eternal servant of Krishna. Because that's our only problem. And that's what Prabhupada came to rectify that problem. The Prabhupada saw only suffering. He saw suffering conditioned souls wherever he went. And his only business was to try and alleviate the suffering. Primarily, of course, through his books, which he insisted that we read regularly. So when it comes, Hare Krishna. So when it comes to reading from the 6th canto, 17th chapter, and stories about Mother Parvati cursing Chitraketu, I have to confess I'm a little bit rusty with my reading up to this point. So that's why I probably feel it wouldn't be appropriate for me to try and cast my opinions on what I'm reading just now. But Prabhupada finished explaining to this chap that God is never, he said that yes, sometimes you are the controller. He admitted that sometimes we are in control, but sometimes we're not in control. So God means the person, when you come to that person who is never controlled, that's God, and that's Krishna. But Prabhupada explained quite a few more things to that chap. And then he repeated the same thing he said. So therefore, you cannot be God, you're a dog. And then the whole audience started to cheer and applaud Prabhupada. And almost like he turned, he looked down at his feet and he turned around and slowly walked all the way back to the back of the hall, back to his seat again. So he was chastised But what I noticed is that he had accepted his chastisement. Whether or not he had understood what Prabhupada was explaining to him or not, I don't know, because he wasn't, in my memory, in the best state to begin with, you know. But I was impressed with how Prabhupada had dealt with him, you know, because Prabhupada could clearly recognize that it was someone possibly out of his head, not entirely, you know, with it, and very agitated and angry. But Prabhupada very peacefully brought the whole thing around, so the whole audience could actually appreciate, you know, what Prabhupada was saying, and our friend took it in the chin, as it were, as well. It's not the only time I saw Prabhupada, you know, being able to turn something around. I was there in Edinburgh also. When Prabhupada arrived in Edinburgh, the first thing he did, he arrived and he went on to his Vyasasana and he gave an address, like a welcome address, you know, just welcome, because there was quite a few people had come to see Prabhupada, and the temple room was quite busy and full. And so Prabhupada gave another talk, and in the room were followers of a very well-known guru at the time, a very well-known young guru. He was called Guru Maharajji, and his movement was called the Divine Light Mission. It may still be going today. I have no idea. I don't know, but it was very big in the 70s, along with quite a few other groups like that. You know, but it was big. And they had a young guru who was only about 14 or 15. He was a young boy, and they regarded him as the divine. I don't quite know how that came about, but they had a little ashram across the road. And so some of their followers came to hear Prabhupada. And I can remember that they all knew they had their etiquette, because most of them brought like pints of milk or fruits and put them on the altar, and then they sat with the other audience and heard Prabhupada speak. And at the end of his talk, he said, "And that is our philosophy. Are there any questions?" And one of the followers said, "Swamiji, why must God be philosophy?" He was quite challenging. He was just a young kid, really, you know, but he was still pretty challenging. So he said, "Why must God be philosophy?" And Prabhupada looked back at him, and without missing a beat, he said, "Krishna is God, and God is great. Philosophy means to know how God is great." And that's all he said. And the chap offered his pranams to Prabhupada and sat down again. So that was one of those instances where Prabhupada never wasted words. He just dealt with everything appropriately. This was a young chap, enthusiastic, thought he would be challenging. I like to think that Prabhupada followed that comment by saying, "You want me to tell you fairy stories?" Because it sounded like that. But I don't know if he actually did or not. But I like to take away the memory as that's how Prabhupada ended. "You want me to tell you fairy stories?" Prabhupada was challenged once again on one of the times that I saw him at Berry Place Temple. Again, this time the room was packed to the point that I can still remember the condensation was dripping from the ceiling. It was so full, it was just packed. And there were, not like today, I suppose, here we have nice, you know, heaters and air conditioning or what have you, depending on what's. But there, in those days, it wasn't like that. So the room was packed out, like sardines in there, and Prabhupada had spoken again, and again he was challenged by a lady stood up, said, "Swami, can you see God?" And again, I never remember Prabhupada having to really stop and think about things or consider things immediately without a moment's hesitation. You know, in reply to just, "Swami, can you see God?" Prabhupada said, "Yes." You cannot? And I was astonished. Because at first I thought, how dare she? Who does she think she is? How are we going to do? Maybe we should throw her out. I'm just thinking all these things, she's a troublemaker, all this stuff. But Prabhupada, that was his response. And it went further than that. Swami, can you see God? He said, yes, you cannot. And then Prabhupada just looked around the room like this. Krishna is everywhere. Why you cannot see? And while Prabhupada was looking around the room, I realized that he was seeing God. He was seeing God everywhere. He saw God. He saw Krishna. Then he looked back and he said, Krishna is everywhere. Why you cannot see? And by this time, the lady was standing up in the middle. Everyone was sitting down, and so she couldn't really move. It was so tight. She couldn't really move, so I could see she was getting embarrassed already. And she really wanted to sit down. She was regretting even standing up in the first place and saying something, but she didn't really know how to deal. She wasn't expecting a response. She thought that she was going to be smart and just, I put you in your place or whatever. So Prabhupada then looked at her again and said, so, do you want to see God? And then she looked down at her feet and shook her head like this. And then Prabhupada went, therefore you cannot see. Like this. So again, being a young newcomer, I didn't really know. I don't recall if Prabhupada followed that up by saying anything else, because that exchange is what I've taken away from that and everything I've learned in that particular exchange. Can you see God? Yes. Immediately, yes. Then he looks around the room like this. Casually, Krishna is everywhere. Why you cannot see? And so she was confused and embarrassed. And then what I can remember is the silence as well between this exchange, because Prabhupada could use silence as well as he could use effective words. So there was a silence, and she was looking at him, and he was looking at her. And it was very powerful. There's a lot going on there as well. And then he says, do you want to see? And then she shakes her head like this. She looks down at her feet and no, I'm not ready. I'm not really, and therefore you cannot see. So that what I'm learning from this is that if I'm not ready, if I don't want it enough, then how am I going to know God? How am I going to find Krishna? If I'm not serious. And what I'm seeing here at Les Mahego are serious individuals, people who are taking their Krishna consciousness seriously. So it always inspires me. If I feel that I might not be taking my Krishna consciousness seriously, then that's all the more reason to associate with those who are. Because Prabhupada always emphasized the importance of associating with devotees, associating with those who take their Krishna consciousness seriously. Because possibly that might rub off on me, that might rub off on us. So usually it's examples the best way of teaching Krishna consciousness. The first way of passing the message of Krishna consciousness, of course, is distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. And then the second way is to set an example, to be a living example of Krishna consciousness ourselves. Then other people can see, if I stay close to this person, I might also become Krishna conscious. That may happen to me also. So for me, when Prabhupada said, it doesn't matter what religion you follow, what matters is, are you following? Because if you're following sincerely, then you'll arrive at love of God, which is the purpose of all religion. But of course, we know also, kindly by Prabhupada's mercy, that the process of Krishna consciousness is the recommended process for the stage that we're living in just now. It's been recommended by Lord Chaitanya. Yeah. Harinama, Harinama, Harinama eva kevalam. That in this age of Kali Yuga, quarrel and hypocrisy and technology and internet and distraction, the age of iron, and well, iron for me means technology, computers, and what, and the influence that it has. The most direct and simple way of becoming connected to Krishna is through the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra and practicing the principles of Krishna consciousness and studying Srila Prabhupada's books on a regular basis. The more the better, and becoming fixed. I'm trying to remember one or two more things about Prabhupada in Scotland. Yes, I unfortunately missed that morning walk because I was in charge of things at the temple with the temple commander. So I had to make sure things were ship shape and the cooking was going on and the place was clean. So I missed that. But I know one or two people who went on that walk. Shrikama? Yeah. Well, this is after Prabhupada had dealt with this student, this aggressive young man. You know, after there were a few more questions and answers came and went. You know, and so Prabhupada said, "Now chant." He said to the devotee, "Now chant." So all the devotees, especially Rabbadananda and Swami, he was a vigorous kirtan leader. You know, Rabbadananda and Swami was actually the cousin of let me see. Who's the world famous kirtanier? You know, the American. No, Agni. Yeah, I agree. He's Bhajan, more Bhajan, but he was a he would Vishnu Jan. Yeah, sorry. Rabbadanandan was a cousin of Vishnu Jan Swami, and he at the time Prabhupada had asked him to come to Scotland to help it all out. You know, to help ground things because we just opened this new temple. And we're all pretty young. We're all youngsters still, you know. It's like so. He was like an elder, and he was a sannyasi, and he was a brilliant preacher and a brilliant kirtan leader. So Prabhupada says, so now chant. And so Radhanandan and all the devotees on the stage, we all started to dance and have a big kirtan. And so we opened the doors. You know, we opened up the outside doors, and in came all these kids from the street, these street kids from Mary Hill as well, Mary Hill street kids, you know, looking for a bit of trouble, maybe, you know, some of them anyway. That's what they were like that, you know. So a lot of them came swarming in, and some of them decided to swarm up onto the stage as well. And I could see they were dancing around like this, having a bit of a, you know, a bit of a wind up, you know, some of them were actually enjoying it, but some of them were horsing around a little bit. And I was thinking that before Prabhupada, it's not a very good thing. Maybe it's not so good that they're having some fun and games, you know. So someone came over to Prabhupada. I was standing next to Prabhupada for some reason. I was just behind Prabhupada. So someone, a devotee came up to Prabhupada and said, "Prabhupada, should we remove these kids from the stage? Should we get, you know?" And Prabhupada said, "No, let them dance. They are devotees." And I was standing just next to Prabhupada, and he said it so forcefully, and his eyes and the tone of his voice was so deep. And in that moment, I saw through Prabhupada's eyes that he saw devotees. He didn't see anything. He didn't see scruffy street kids trying to have a laugh and a joke, you know, and copy the devotees like this, you know. He saw devotees. So he said, "No, let them dance. They are devotees." So thanks, Rikam, for reminding me. So these are the little things that have kept me close to Krishna consciousness. You know, I might not be the world's best example, but nevertheless, that's what's kept me, those moments of being near Srila Prabhupada and seeing how he so kindly came from For instance, living in Vrindavan, preparing himself to come to the West to carry out the mission of his Guru Maharaj Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And he even comes to a place, he starts off in the Lower East Side in the Bowery, New York, in the middle of 1965, right? In the middle of, when the Bowery was really the lowest place you could be in New York. And I thought to myself, and also from there, he's come. Yeah.
But it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on what you thought about Prabhupada. What was most prominent about his personality?
Yeah, I think that's probably what I'm trying to do now. Actually, is kind of like standing behind him. Standing behind him, hearing him say, "No, let them dance. They're devoted," because I knew what these kids are like. I was born and raised in Glasgow, and I knew what it's kind and how Prabhupada saw them in a completely different light. Prabhupada was like an ocean, in which his moods. He was deep. He was as deep as the ocean, and yet he was able to relate with people as they came, whoever they were, how he related with the chap who challenged him. Why must God be philosophy? How he related with the woman who challenged him. Can you see God? Trying to expose him as whatever. Someone asked me that question before. If you probably see these interviews, the Prabhupada Memories, Siddhanta Prabhu has done a long series of interviewing disciples of Srila Prabhupada, just trying to coax out all the recollections and all their memories so that it can be available, for as long as possible into the future, because everyone's recollection of Prabhupada differs, and yet it's like a different aroma of a field of flowers. It's like a different angle, to the reflection on the crystal. I just recall my recollection of my memory of Prabhupada is that he was never fazed. He was totally immersed in Krishna consciousness, so nothing fazed him or upset him or tripped him up. He was absolutely 100% to deliver Krishna consciousness to a child or to an atheist or someone who really wanted to know more about Krishna consciousness, to an academic or to a philosopher. He was at home all the time in his mission. So 1 in a million. So I probably veered off a little bit from speaking about this particular. In fact, perhaps the next speaker could start at the beginning, where we started today, tomorrow, because sometimes these stories are a little bit distant in my memory. It's been a while since I've read these amazing stories, but the gist of this particular what we've read today is that this Chitraketu was a little bit carried away with himself, with his ego. He had a large false ego, and thought that he was a lot more powerful and influential than he really was. And as we're going to read in this chapter, needless to say, he got his comeuppance, as we all do sooner or later. I think that's probably all for now. If that's it. Does anyone else have anything? Prabhu?
Just from your realizations of seeing Prabhupada in Scotland, and also, just from your own realizations, how best to spread the Krishna consciousness movement in Scotland, considering the mentality of Scottish people. Prabhupada saw that in some ways.
Yeah.
So maybe any insights you have upon that?
It's hard to say. I know that generally speaking, yeah, it's hard to generalize, but I think I understand. If I were living here, at Les Mahego, and being charged with how to distribute Krishna consciousness to the Scottish mentality, it would be a tough one. I think that it's without generalizing too much, Scottish people are hard, and they're not going to accept anything lightly. So if you're asking for advice, how best to distribute Krishna consciousness, it has to start from you and how your Krishna consciousness is within yourself. How deeply have you taken it into your own heart? Because Scottish people, I think, aren't foolish. They're not going to accept any old thing unless they're going to notice your lack of genuineness, if you understand what I'm saying. So you have to be genuine if you want to succeed, especially up here. I think Scottish people have it hard in general, what with the weather and whatever it is anyway, and just the general. So we have to take. First of all, we have to be Krishna conscious. We have to practice our Krishna consciousness very carefully and sincerely, and then we'll be able to give it back out to others as individuals. And the Scottish people, I think they'll appreciate that. I think they already are. I think we distribute a lot of literature up here. And Les Mahego Temple seems to be doing really well. So I don't know if it's just about wherever you are, but especially particularly in Scotland. What do you think, my friend from Liverpool? Yeah. 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 We're living in an age where, especially the young generation, they're not going to accept anything lightly. They want the genuine deal, and they can see through anything else. I think particularly Scottish people are like that as well. So it's about be genuine. Krishna consciousness is the real deal. So it's important that we pick it up and that we try our best not to drop it. Don't drop it. Polish it. Polish it but keep it. Because the gift that Prabhupada has given us is like a treasure that we don't want to put it to one side after we've picked it up. Just polish it and become more sincere as individuals. And Prabhupada is always behind you. I'd better stop now, otherwise I may go on for the rest of the morning. So I thank you very much for staying with me and what I've had to say. I wasn't expecting to be invited to say anything today, and I don't do this very often, if at all. Maybe the day will come when I do a lot more of this, and I'll be able more educated when it comes to advanced verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam like this. So thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.